thank you so much. That was definitely one of the nicest and warmest introductions I've received in a very long time, so thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you this evening. I only had about 30 seconds to look at the exhibit in the back of the room, but it's really nice, and I can tell this is quite an impressive group of women who've gathered here for such a lovely occasion. I should say, and this follows wonderfully on the remarks you just heard, I'm actually missing my own reunion to be here tonight because it's all right, priorities. I graduated in 1984, so it's my 25th reunion from Georgetown this weekend. And I tell you this not to make you feel guilty, although my husband and children will all tell you I'm very good at making people feel guilty. And I tell you this not to dwell on the math that may separate us, but because I actually think this 25-year gap between your graduating class and my graduating class is a crucially important gap, particularly for women. It's a much bigger gap than the gap that existed between my class of 1984 and the class of 2009, and class of 1959 and class of 1934. Let me just take a minute to tell you why I think that's true. In both 1939 and 1954, women who wanted to attend college were largely restricted to women's schools. And there was really no difference between 1939 and 1954 in the level and extent of those restrictions. By contrast, by the time I went to school in 1984, and still true today, no college in the United States remains all male, and the vast majority of colleges are coeducational. So there's really been no change between 1984 and today, but a massive change between your class and my class in 1984. In 1934 and 1959, the majority of women who graduated college still presumed either that they would not have careers or that their careers would fall predominantly in areas such as teaching or nursing. And I won't take your time tonight to give you all the data, but trust me, there's a lot of data. Now, there were, of course, exceptions, like many of the women here in this room who did go to college expecting to have careers and, in fact, pursued those careers, but in statistical terms, those women were relatively rare. And there was very little difference statistically between 1959 and 1934. In fact, I think in 1934 it was actually higher because it was during the Depression, and more women presumed they would have to go into the workforce. By 1984, when I went to college, that presumption had been entirely blown out of the water. And happily, that remains the case today. So as I said in my inaugural address in October, and I apologize, I know some of you were there, but you probably don't remember it all that well. So at risk of being arrogant, let me quote myself for just a minute here. Rather than facing a life devoid of options, women coming of age now at the turn of the 21st century have an almost infinite range of choices, a lifetime of wandering along the garden of the forked path and wondering which way to go. This, I suggested, is the distinction of choice. It's what differentiates the women of Barnard's past from the women of its future, and indeed what differentiates most women today from the millions who have come before them. This sentiment and the sense of the generational change was captured quite brilliantly in our commencement address given by the president of the student government, Sarah Besnoff, who hopefully some of you had a chance to meet today. And Sarah said, it is this culture of choice that is our generation's unique opportunity, a blessing that our mothers were not given in equal measure. So there is, I would argue for you, a major, major difference between my generation and those that have come after me and your generation, which was really, statistically speaking, on the cusp. However, it would be entirely wrong to conclude that somehow the women's problem has been transcended over the past 25 years, or that women today face a level playing field with men, because clearly the problems remain and the field is very far from flat. As I understand it, actually I'm pretty sure this is true, Your class was told explicitly and repeatedly by Millicent McIntosh, your beloved Millicent McIntosh, that you could have it all. But most of you discovered subsequently, I suspect, that you couldn't. Or at least that you couldn't have it all at the same time. By contrast, my class of 1984, truly believed that we could have it all. And that wasn't just because we had wonderful role models like Millicent McIntosh, but because your class had already done all the hard work. So your class and the classes that followed you were the ones who tore down all-male colleges and all-male clubs and all-male power circles. You became the first women to go to law school in real numbers, to go to medical school, to go into the corporate world and into high-powered philanthropy. So we looked at you and we said, they fought, we have it easy. We now just sort of glide into the future and have it all. But somehow, that didn't work out either. And even though women today are so much better represented in medical school and law school and corporate America, they still remain vastly underrepresented at the highest levels of power. And so we, and here I mean the Barnard community, face these questions of why and how. And it's very much these questions that we want to tackle over the next few years, largely through the auspices of the Athena Center, which we will be launching in September, the Athena Center for Leadership Studies. So let me just throw out a few of the questions that we are going collectively to be pondering over the next few years. Do women make different choices than men, or are those choices thrust upon them? Do women lead differently than men? Or are there are there ways of reshaping organizations to make them more conducive to women's ways of leadership? Some might argue that there are some institutions out there, like Wall Street, that could perhaps use a different model of leadership. And then the central question that we here have to grapple with is, how do we, as a leading educational institution for women, an institution that is fundamentally still devoted to educating women, how do we educate our students so that they not only have all these choices before them, which they do really, but how do we give them the means to select wisely and perhaps even strategically from the array of choices that they find? So these are the questions that we will be tackling over the next few years, questions for which we very much welcome your input, your ideas, your wisdom, your experience, your criticisms, as long as you phrase them nicely. And I know that my job here really was to be questioned by Susan, but I figured just in case she forgot to bring questions, I would throw a few of them out. So thank you so much for being here today, for everything you have done for Barnard and continue to do for Barnard. And thank you on behalf of all the classes of women who are going to succeed in or follow in all of our footsteps and keep trying to work on these questions and finally someday solve them. Thank you.